Hi guys, my name is Greg McCullough. I'm one of the development managers with Red Hat, focused a lot on Automate. Been with ManageIQ from pretty much the beginning, and work with Madhu as well as, who will introduce himself in a second, but I want to point out Tina and Bill, who nicely moved down to the front row for us so we can point them out as needed.
Hi, my name is Madhu Kanoor. I started working with Red Hat in 2014, so I've been primarily focused on Automate for the last 2 years. And we'll be talking more about some of the changes that we are bringing to Automate in the near future and somewhere down the road.
Don't get out of it. All right. So I think Greg B pointed out something. I wanted to clarify maybe the Joe fits three-time rule a little bit. That started back at a previous company, and I was working with a developer who I didn't realize at the time was sitting outside of Joe Fitz's office. And so Joe would go through brainstorming sessions and would come out, and that would be the first person he would see. And so he would tell him like whatever he was thinking. And so I realized this guy's like constantly stressed, even more than I normally am. And I realized every week he's switching tasks. Like, what are you doing? Like, and I'm talking to him, and I'm realizing Joe comes out of his office, and he's like just dumping whatever he's thinking about on this guy. And so we kind of start like, he ended up actually leaving software development. But, so this is a cautionary tale. But so the idea was we really needed to get people to kind of understand, like, step one, Joe's just brainstorming, ideas are coming out. Step two, like, it's starting to kind of get roots, and he's got an idea. It's really, going to be something. And then usually the third time is, you should already be done with it, but you probably aren't. But so that's kind of how I remember it. I could be wrong, but so we have the coveted before lunch spot. So we tried to keep the agenda light. There's room for improvement, but we'll go with it. So some recently added features, and Madhu will talk about the future enhancements. Some of them very close, some of them a little further out. So we're going to kind of deep dive pretty quickly here, and I apologize. This talk is really focused. Let's say it's a spectrum of people that really know Automate and people that really know Automate. So hopefully you fit into that window. So we're going to talk about RBAC, method : as we call it, and some enhancements to the missing method. So RBAC. So Automate is generally seen as kind of an admin tool, and it has access to the entire system, or at least within the classes we expose, all of the objects within that class. Once tenancy started to come in, we started focusing Automate more on what context it was running under, user, group, the tenant. And so in the first round, we really didn't address RBAC. We still left it open as an admin tool. But one of the concepts we talked about was, we usually talked about it as kind of the Coke-Pepsi example, where you could be hosting for two different companies, and you wanted to ensure that they never saw each other's stuff. So you never wanted Coke to see Pepsi's resources, and so obviously we have all this in RBAC within the product, but Automate was kind of skipping over it. So talking to different people, mostly Kevin Morey right here. Raise your hand. Higher. Good. This was a problem he was running into in implementations and POCs, and he started to explain to us how he was solving it, and it sounded absolutely insane. Tagging, and we didn't even know you could do that. No, we did know that. So he was really going through a lot of hoops to maintain tags and information in the environment so that he could do the RBAC filtering within the Automate method himself, which is obviously just not performant, as well as error prone. So we went back and we enabled a couple of methods which now allow you to enforce RBAC within the methods. So obviously by default it's disabled, but now you can enable it, disable it, or check what state you're currently in. This is really helpful in a lot of things like Automate methods running from dialogues, where you have a user ordering a service and you really just want to focus on those instances or values that are accessible to them. But right now, disabling, there's a lot of times we don't have sharing of templates, right? So across tenants. So if you have a template that you need to get to that user or tenant doesn't have access to, you might need to disable it to access those resources. So that's in place. Future, where we want to get to is really more the lockdown model by default. So in here, so global automate configurations is kind of a future concept as well, but the idea is that we would have a place where you could configure this. The default we would assume would be strict at this point, allowing you to change that to have the methods control it, or depending on your environment, just disable it completely and use it the way it is today, where it's an admin tool and it has access to everything. So method : optionally allows a state field to directly contain a method, and methods can be stored in the same class. So what this is, state machines today have relationships, so they have to point to an instance. A lot of classes we have that we ship out of the base model point to an instance, only to then point that instance at a method, and there's nothing in between. It almost serves no purpose except for to redirect it. It kind of makes a mess of the namespaces, and you have instances not really co-located where it really would be much cleaner if they were. So the advantages here is, we said we can keep the methods near each other, and we reduce the number. I think the next slide. So here, this is, I know you can't see this so well, but in the before slides, see, is this the laser? Way down here, this is the state machine at the bottom that says default, and it uses these instance references and then talks to the methods below it. On the other side, this is actually part of our Ansible work that we're talking about later. The default is the state machine. So it doesn't have to go outside of that class, outside of that namespace to call the methods that it needs. They're straight through and keeps everything nice and together. And then so within that default instance, this is what it would look like. We're just telling a relationship field to act as a method field. And we were working on a project with QE, and Milan in the back, you can raise your hand. There you go. He kept asking us, why do I need to do this? Like, why do I have to have all these instances that don't do anything that, and we've heard it from other people, and so he screamed the loudest, and we decided it was a good time to do it. So now missing in instance name. So we've always had the missing instance used in a number of places like profiles within provisioning, say, where if you don't have a group defined, that's where it picks up all the settings that it needs. But as we were doing the Ansible work, one of the things we realized we were missing was a way to kind of capture the name that they really wanted to call. It's pretty common if you do any Ruby programming, you're missing method, you kind of know what method they actually wanted to call and what you're rerouting it for. So we added the same type of logic in here where the missing instance name gets passed through. And so now you can use that to extend the work that you're going to do. Like I said, it can be substituted, and it's only available within missing instance. I'm going to show, all right, again, here we are still reducing the number of instances that we have to have in the model, and it can be used in any field. So here's where it's implemented in the default model that we're shipping under Ansible Tower. We wanted to be able to call into this instance and not have to create a job template name for every job template we wanted to handle. So it literally just grabs the name that you're calling, and if you can see in the top example, we're calling job template, my template. That instance in the database doesn't exist. So that name we're calling gets substituted in, as you can see in the bottom, and then the rest of the workflow then is going to go look up that job template and call Ansible to use that job template for whatever provisioning or configuration work we're doing. So this allows us to support any of the job templates without having to modify the automate model to support them. And then alternately, if you need to implement something, you just put that name, create an instance with that name, and you do whatever additional configuration work. Is there anywhere else we're using that right now?
No, this is the only place right now.
Okay, so yeah, so that's only We're only using it within the Ansible model, but we expect that people will use it, in their own modeling.
Yeah.
Any?
Okay.
Please hold all questions till the end. No. Go ahead. Yes. You guys should get used to hearing from Kevin during this talk.
Yeah, so my question is, if you have a nested instance and you're setting that null instance at root, is it an object or is it actually at root?
It's actually in the dot missing instance.
Okay,
So it's not at the root object. So it's localized within that instance. And it actually only exists within the dot missing. After the dot missing is done, it's thrown away.
And that's a good transition. All right, over to Madhu to talk about the future stuff.
All right,
Thank you.
so last design summit, we had talked about Git integration, and I had done a small demo. And some of the things that we have done over the couple of years are to actually use Git as the file system database where we can store all the models and have the UI and everything look at it as if it's dealing with Postgres. And along the way, we realized there were a lot of challenges. One of them was actually sharing the repository between different appliances. And the other thing was, this thing about, dev environment and, having multiple developers, trying to update the same exact method and then figuring out which one wins. So we didn't want to get into all of that, so we backed out a little. And we started thinking, maybe there's a different way of solving it. So right now, this is still a step in the eventual journey, but one of the things that we are trying to do is try to get a database from an external repository and store it in Postgres. So I'll actually go through some of the key points in here, which is we basically import an automate domain from a Git repository. You can actually select a branch or a tag, and all of this information is actually stored in the Postgres database. The domains are logged because since it's coming from an external remote source, we didn't want users to be going in and modifying those domains. You could actually copy things out of it, but you really can't make changes to it directly. And whenever you try to synchronize it, it'll actually override the existing domain and pull in the new stuff. So we have a single appliance that actually acts as a Git owner. And whenever we refresh or import calls, they actually get routed to the right appliance because we think there'll be one appliance in your zone which will either have access to the internet or that can go outbound and get stuff. And there is also some future work related to REST API calls to initiate domain updates. And this is actually like a Git hook that somebody would write to call back into us to basically say, hey, I just updated my Git repository. Can you go update the model inside of Postgres? So if we have like multiple appliances in an environment, right now what they do is they share a Postgres database, and that's actually the biggest stumbling block that we had is when you have a local repository, how do you actually synchronize that between appliances? So if you have, say, appliance 1 is basically a Git owner, and it can actually go out and download repositories. What it would do is it would download the repository onto appliance 1, and it will actually be a bare repository. We won't check out anything. We would leave the entire bare repository with all the branches and tags. And once the user has decided which branch or tag they actually want to import into Postgres, we'll actually import that and store information in the domain about which branch was used to do the import, what is the commit SHA, and stuff like that, so we can actually do differencing when a new update comes in. I think I have a small demo that I can. Okay. So the first thing is the settings. Under configuration, there is we have a new role called the Git repositories owner, and you need to enable this to route all the calls to the right appliance. Otherwise, if your appliance does not have access to the internet, the request is going to stay in the queue and not get processed. So this is an import-export screen that we have, where you'd actually specify the URL. And back to Kevin, Kevin's Ramrex, and Kevin actually has a bunch of domains out there which really have a lot of cool things. And one of the things that you'd actually see is in his domain, he has a whole bunch of stuff, like he has dialogues and reports and service catalogs. So we actually download the entire repository onto the appliance. So down the road, we are actually assuming that we'll be able to take advantage of this and not only import automate dialogues, but also import service dialogues, stuff that are in there. So here, I think he only has one branch in the Cloud Forms Essential. So at this point, we are actually trying to import the repository and build the automate model. So I'll show you if we go back into the Automate Explorer. The Cloud Forms Essential domain is there, and it actually has which branch was used to download, and then it tells you that it is logged and you cannot update things in there. The only thing that you'd be able to do is use it as it is, or copy things out and create your own domain and override some of the methods that are actually there in his domain. Yeah, it also has a GitHub logo at the corner. Tells you it's a Git-based repository. So I'm going to show you another example here where Kevin actually has a domain, the old one, which actually has two branches, the Cloud Forms POC, and you can actually pick a branch that you want to import into the Postgres database. So there are two branches that he has. There are no tags. I think he doesn't have one with the tags in it, but we support both tags and branches. So we copy this out, and I think the model that you had before, I think is slightly different from what you have now, I think. So we copy the URL and we go back into the import-export screen again, and we'll try to do the import of the Cloud Forms POC, the old domain that Kevin has. Now, some of these screens, we're still thinking of redesigning it a little bit so that you can actually tell the user which is the current branch that is available, and if there are any updates, so the user can actually process the updates and basically decide if they want to use the latest changes that are up in the repository and import into the database, or stay with the current version that they have. So this, I think, has a lot more instances, I think, the original 5.3 database that you had, Kevin. So that's the original, the Cloud Forms POC 5.3, origin 5.3 just got imported. And I think that's the end of the demo. Okay, so one of the big concerns we have is there are just too many automate methods, and we get feedback from John Hardy and some of these guys saying, people don't want to write Ruby code. So we thought maybe there are ways in which we can actually improve the performance, as well as make sure that users can actually use some of the existing functionality that is there in our product. And there is a thing called expressions or filters that has been there in the product all along. So we thought, why not use those expression and filters and use them as an automate method? So this is actually an attempt to do that, and I'll actually show you. Performance-wise, it's amazingly fast. And some of the things that we use it for are basically the dynamic dialogues, because dynamic dialogues constantly do this back and forth. They spawn off a method, get the results back, and display to the user. We have optimized the output so that it works perfectly for dynamic dialogues. And I'll go through some of the screenshots here. And by default, you get RBAC. RBAC is for free because whoever the user logging in, his user and credentials and everything is applied to get you the right visibility into the model. And the expression methods, they're actually stored in the Automate model. It works on a single database object. Like you can actually build an expression either for a VM or a service or any other things that are out there. And that list keeps growing. So as we added the Ansible configuration templates or all those things, they're all going to be showing up here, and you'd be able to take advantage of all of them. The advantages are there is no overhead of DRB, and you don't need any scripting to do this. So if we compare like a regular automate method with an expression method, we have your automate engine. It basically gets a request either from the UI or some other system, and what it does is it actually ends up, since it's running a method, it has to spawn off a DRB server, and then on the other side we have a DRB client, and then eventually the method runs. So there's multiple steps involved here, as you're transitioning from one to the other, and then you're exchanging objects all along this pipeline. And then eventually the method says, I need to get these objects out. It makes a call, goes back into the DRB server, the engine gets hold of it, and then sends the result back to the client. So this whole transaction actually takes a lot of time. Now, if we were to do the same thing with an expression method actually stores the entire expression in the Automate database, in the Postgres, and what it does is it actually provides for substitution of the runtime parameters. So we have the engine, and we have the request coming in from the outside, and if it turns out to be an expression method, we get the expression out from the database, we evaluate it, we process it, and then we send back the results. So there is no overhead of DRB, there is no scripting involved in this process. Kevin, you have a question? No, I think you're looking. So I have a simple expression which basically tries to get a bunch of VMs from the database given a prefix and a suffix. So if you look at it, where do you point? Just this on top? Oh, the middle one, okay. So here you'd actually see the location is marked as expression, and then there is an expression object. And I'll show you in the demo. I think there are a whole bunch of objects that you have access to. And then right below that is actually something that you must be familiar with. This is actually what you see in your regular filter or expression. It basically gives you a humanized form of that expression. So here it's basically saying that the VM name starts with something which is a user input, and the VM name ends with something which is actually the end piece here, right? And then the bottom half of the screen, you'll actually see that's how your typical expression builder looks like. And when we store it, this is the sample view, and one of the things that you'll actually see is at runtime, these arguments are going to be filled in based on what the dialog is going to provide. Like here, the dialog is going to provide the dialog prefix value and the dialog suffix value, and these two parameters are going to be substituted into the name starts with user input and ends with user input, and those are going to be evaluated, and the results are going to come out from the RBAC calls. So I have a demo again to show that. Escape. Okay, so I have a domain called expression domain where I have created a VM names expression method, And there is also the classical one, which is basically mimicking the same exact structure. There is actually an operations namespace, and then there is a methods class, which actually has an available VMs instance, and it has a method called VM names. It's not playing? Yeah, no, that's okay. So this is how your typical method looks like, the one that you wrote in Ruby. It actually has a EVM, VMDB call here, which actually goes out and gets all the instances from the database. And then it collects all of that information and then builds all the things specific to how dialogues work, gets all of the data and sends it back to the dialogues, right? Now, there is an equivalent one from the expression method side. So here you'd see that all of these, the sort by, the sort order, the data type, they're all stored in the instance as opposed to being in the method. So they have actually moved from here, and now they are actually available in the instance. So when the dialog runs, it actually has access to all of these values. And the method actually looks like the typical expression that you have, which basically has the VM name, starts with, ends with, like I showed you before, and then it actually has the 2 runtime arguments that are going to be substituted into that expression. So if I were to edit this method, you'll actually see that the location is expression, and these are all the objects that are currently available. There could be more down the road. We don't know what all, whatever we add in the future will all be available. And now here, this is actually the VMware template, and like these are all the methods that are available that you can use directly in the model. So if you have, there's some CPU count, whatever you need, they can all be grabbed from here. At runtime, you can process it, and then you don't even have to write any scripts for this. So that's actually the biggest advantage of doing it this way. So I'm just scrolling through some of the lists that are there, and this information is actually available for most of the objects that I showed you in in the previous the drop-down that you saw. And you can actually combine expressions together. You can do and, or, you can do counts. You can do all kinds of things with this. And then this is where we add arguments, where we have the 2 arguments that are going to be put in at runtime. So now I think I'm going to show you how I'm going to use this. So in Automate, there is actually, as part of the customizations, we have buttons, right? And in the buttons, I have that a simple button that actually, given a prefix and a suffix, lists all the VMs that are there in the database. So if we look at, come on, I think what it will do is it will actually call the available VMs method as part of the VM list. So you'd see down here, it actually has the operations methods available VMs. And then the prefix and suffix are the 2 values that are going to be filled in, and that's how the dialog prefix and dialog suffix is going to work. So I would actually go back to my Automate domain and make sure that my expression domain is disabled, so that we would actually use the classical version of how we have it today. And I have a button that is actually connected to one of the virtual machines. So I click on the button there and bring up the tag VM from the list, and see this is actually the performance delay that you're going to see. It's actually trying to get all the VMs from the database, and it's going via the DRB, and the delay happens because of that entire process. So it has pulled in about like 2,000 VMs that I have in my database. And then if you do the prefix and suffix, you provide the 2, and then it does the filtering. It'll actually reduce your list down to 7 or I think 7 VMs. Now, we do the same exact thing using an expression method, and you'd actually see that there was no scripting involved, and the performance improves drastically because the first load that you see will be so quick because everything is happening on the engine side. There is no overhead of DRB. So I'm going to enable my expression domain now. So now it comes into play. And I think lunch is ready, I think. So same exact thing. You click on the virtual machine. And you click on the VM actions tag VM from a list. So here you'd see it is actually pulling down 2,000 VMs compared to how it took in the previous one. So you do the prefix suffix and do the refresh, and it gives you the same list, but it's a lot quicker now. So that's the end of that demo. Alt enter. Okay. So we have been getting a lot of RFEs on email consolidation. There are way too many methods was one of the concerns that people had. So what we are planning on doing is actually using a single built-in method and defining all the email parameters in an instance and fetching values from a config object. So something would work right out of the box. You don't have to go change or copy instances if there are plans to actually create something called a config domain, which is still in the works. What that would allow you to do is create these settings that you can make in an environment like the default email address and stuff like that, and we can actually pull that into the ManageIQ domain at runtime and do the right stuff. So today, if you compare the models, the current model actually has 15 classes for email. There are 41 instances, and there are 39 external methods and 1 built-in method. So what we're planning on doing is going to a single class, increasing the number of instances. We're going to go from 41 to 61, because I think there are places where we're going to double up and create multiple instances. There are going to be no external methods. So there's, again, no overhead of DRB here. So the emails would go through the same process where they just turn around and send the mail using the built-in methods, and we would be using that single built-in method to actually drive the entire email. So this is how the new structure looks like. We have everything, like the VM configure, reconfigure, service template. All of those emails there would be an instance, and the instance would turn around and call the send email method. So this is a typical instance schema, how it would look like. You would have an owner object, which is also something new that I'm going to talk about. And then there is the to address, the CC, the BCC, which is something new that we are planning on adding. Then there is the from, the signature, the subject, body. And then you optionally have a method point to actually customize some of these parameters. And then in the end, when it's done, it actually calls a built-in method called send email. So a sample instance would look like this. You have an owner, and this is something new that you're going to see is the vm.evm owner ID. What that does is it actually pulls in the owner object from the database and creates a variable for you that you can actually use called owner. And then it actually has the to, and if you look at the to, it actually uses the two vertical bars that we see in Ruby, which is actually something called null coalescing operator. What it does is it actually breaks this entire string into single chunks, and then on each one, it actually tries to do substitution to get the value. And the first non-blank value that it finds, it can actually use that. And what we are seeing is in most of these 39 methods that we have, most of the scripts are exactly the same. They would actually be doing get me the value from here. If that doesn't exist, get me the value from this one. So all of that logic now is actually encapsulated directly in the instance, so you don't have the overhead of running a method. And then all the other fields, like if you look at the subject, the body, they are actually heavily using substitution to build everything in an instance and then just calling the send email. So you don't have to go out to a method to actually do this. You can actually do the substitution and everything inside an instance and directly call the email. So one of the themes that I keep talking about is we got to stay more on the instance side and less on the method side. And one of the reasons is when we eventually go to the REST layer where we have to integrate with REST, doing it in instances will actually guarantee that they would work even when we move to REST. But if we actually have cases where there is a method involved and the method has to play with the workspace, then it becomes a challenge working or porting those methods into REST. So some of the new features that we had to add to support this consolidated email where the null coalescing operator, then there is a substitution support for methods which take arguments, and then accessing VMDB objects in the model. So the null coalescing operator is basically like two vertical bars that you can actually insert into a string. There is a new data type, so that we don't do this for any attribute. We do it only for those attributes which have that type. It is actually order dependent. It does not directly throw the whole thing into Ruby. It actually takes it piece by piece, evaluates it, and makes sure that it uses the first non-blank value that's there. It will skip over objects that might not exist. For example, if the owner object doesn't exist in this scenario, it would actually move on to the MIQ request object. If the MIQ request that's nil, it will move on to the requester email. So the 4 options that are here, previously they were all being done in a script. So now all of that actually gets encapsulated into this instance. So to add it, you'd basically have a new data type. You'd actually add it to an attribute. And then the other enhancement that we had to make was support methods with arguments. Typically, you could do MIQ request.name and MIQ request.id, but you could not call a method that takes an argument. So for example, the owner's email is actually stored in the request in one of the option hashes. So this method actually allows you to go down to that level and basically plug that owner email from the options hash. The other thing that was added was accessing VMDB objects directly from the model. So this has existed in the product but was never displayed, so we just started exposing it. And the reason we had to do that was when you try to do a retirement or a reconfigure of a VM, there is typically an owner associated with it. And so when we're doing the provisioning, the owner doesn't exist, but as the provision happens, the VM actually gets owned by somebody. So by using this technique, what we do is we can actually figure out who is the owner and load that user object into the model. And from that owner object, the user object, we can actually get the email address that we can actually send the email out to. If the object is not found in the database, it actually just ignores it and moves on. It again has the advantage of RBAC. You'd only be seeing things that you're allowed to see. So these are some of the objects that I think we would be adding more down the road, but I think all of these objects, if you look at it, they have the different type, the host, VM, storage, EMS, policy. They can all be now picked up from the database and assigned directly to an attribute called owner here. So this is another stuff that we actually got from Kevin. It is basically to update the messages that we, as we are going through the different request provisioning services, you would actually see things like active 1, pending 2, pending 3, and those messages didn't make sense. I think Kevin had done a lot of work on making it more, appealable to the user. So we actually have the name of the service that we are working with, the state machine that we are working on, and which retry. So all of this is actually brought in, and Bill actually ended up integrating that into the update provision status. So this is some of the new ideas that we're thinking about. One of the things, I don't know if you heard in the talk today, they were saying, when something runs, there is no visibility as to what is happening inside the system. So we are thinking of collecting state machine runtime statistics. So in Automate, typically all the work gets done through a state machine. So the state machine actually has, different values, and each being a state. And when that state runs, there is actually, before you enter the state, you do the on entry, and then you actually do the on error if there is a failure, and then you also have the on exit, which is processed at the very end. So what we are planning on doing is keeping track of the statistics in the request. And the reason for this is if you encounter an issue, you can actually figure out which state you're stuck in. So all of this information would be captured in the request, and at the end of it, you'd be able to do it, like a post analysis to basically say, how many servers did this request bounce through? You would see the request going to one server, then it goes into the next server. So you can see it bouncing around different servers, and you can figure out where it actually got stuck. So it can actually be used during execution time, if we can actually come up with like a visualizer that can actually consume this data, and also after execution, for debugging purposes, trying to figure out where it actually went and which is the server that actually had a problem. You want to talk about this guy?
Thanks, Madhu. Is this one? Yep. So just a few more bullet points we wanted to throw up of stuff that we've been talking about and is pretty, well, a little further out. But custom buttons, right now, for VM services, they're all usually, once you go into the service, you see them. You wouldn't see them on the list view screen or whatever Dan said they're called now in this morning's talk. What is it? Table view, thank you. So we really want to be able to have some of those buttons be able to be configured to be on that table view screen where you can multi-select. There's some challenges there, the different modes you'd want to run in, either create a task for each one or group them together and run them or maybe batch them. So we have to work through some of those details, but I know that's been an enhancement that's been around for a while that we were looking at closely. Madhu mentioned the REST integration. People that are really familiar with Automate know about the service models and all the layering and RBAC that's in between there. It's maintenance. There's a lot of stuff that we want to get to a single API that we can use. Obviously, if the UI is using it and other resources, tools, it'd be great to have Automate hooked into that and have one path that does everything. It would support RBAC that it does today, and then we could offload all the maintenance onto the RBAC team. So that's why I'm for that one. Ola gave away the Docker container in the first talk, but yeah, so we've been talking recently about running Automate methods inside of containers, largely for isolation and security, but that's just starting now. We haven't really gone too far down that road, but we've had some initial conversations, and that's something we really want to push forward on. And ultimately, the final one, scheduling Automate tasks. I think a lot of people do this today. I've heard about setting up cron jobs and stuff like that to call back into the system to run the automation task, and it's not a great way to run it. If we can get that stuff inside of the UI, visualize there that it's can be centrally managed, it'd be great for everyone and keep those tasks all in one place. So that's another one that we're hopefully working on real soon here. Yep, I think. All right. So if Kevin has any questions, we'll take those now. Do you really? You said no.
Just one. On the multiple buttons, is there any thought about maybe using like Madhu's expression builder so that when you assign a button to a resource like a VM or a host, being able to set up an expression so that the button is only appearing on the button group if it meets that expression? For example, I only want VMware buttons to be appropriate to VMware VMs or something like that, and being able to tie that in.
That's right. Yeah, so that is one of the areas we're looking at. I don't think we've talked about it in the scope of the expression editor, but that is one of the things we know we have a need for as well, right? Being able to scope that down to specific resources even within the Yep. No. Don't you want to go to lunch already?
Last question. As you well know, we're building a state machine, the container development. You probably know that because I'm bugging you on a daily basis. But my main question is we're finding ourselves repeating code because we don't really have a way to share methods between states. And I was thinking maybe you're going to incorporate something like helpers that will be available for all of the state, or at least on an instance level. Is that something you're thinking about?
Yeah, so yes, another one we have been talking about as well. I think there's a number of different use cases, how we can approach that. So we know it's an issue as far as being able to share code that way. So I don't think we really have an approach yet, but I know.
I think like with the Ansible, when we're trying to do the Ansible integration, we actually ended up writing a client gem. Right? And what the Ansible methods do is they can actually start taking advantage of the gem. So maybe that's one way to go. So that actually reduces the complexity in the Automate methods. I think like the more complex the code is on the automate side, I think it's more difficult to manage. So I think like if you had your own pieces that you wrote it and put it in a separate gem and use that, you only have like simple calls into it from the automate side.
I agree, but then you have to have either place all the code in one gem, like if I'm building a state machine, you have to concentrate all the code in one gem, which isn't so efficient in my opinion. Or creating separate gems, and then you need to have them all in and on the appliance. So I don't know.
I think we have had a discussion on this, I think like with some of the folks out on the field. You know, there are two ways to go at it. Like one of them is actually, should we store everything inside of automate? Because I think that actually gives you the thing, you know, it actually travels as a bundle when you export the entire domain. And then maybe have some kind of a referencing back to one of the original code, and when you include it in your method, you can basically say include these things, and all those methods should actually get included. No?
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.